Episode 25 with Stephen Ingram.
Hey everybody, you're listening to the Never Forsaken podcast, looking at the lives of the outcasts, the seekers, the never forsakens, those in or out of the local church and passionate about Christ. The show is broadcast weekly, and show notes and more information can be found at neverforsakenpodcast.com. I'm your host, John Robinson. Let's get into the show.
Today's guest is Stephen Ingram, author of Organic Student Ministry and basically expert on all things related to student ministry. He's a lead consultant at Ministry Architects and the director of student ministries at Canterbury United Methodist Church. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks, John.
Great to have you, Stephen, and I think this is a topic that will be great for a lot of listeners. We haven't really got into this at all, talking about student and youth ministries. And according to some of the information I read about you online, you're considered the Steve Jobs of student ministry.
Yeah, that's a crazy title. It's funny whenever I do these interviews. That's one of the first things people always say to me. A guy who I just consider a huge mentor and just the guru of youth ministry as far as I'm concerned, Mark DeVries, is the one who gave me that title, and he is being incredibly generous when he said it, or when he wrote it, I guess. But I think I've asked him several times what exactly do you mean by that, Mark? And he said, well, I've never talked to you when you don't have a new idea for something, a new way of looking at something, so he really was talking about, I guess, kind of an innovative spirit, and I just blush every time someone says that.
Yeah, but creative and fresh topics. That's some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Oh, I just thought that was pretty cool. I was like, when I saw that, I was like, I got to talk to this guy. I got to see what makes him tick. So Stephen, if you could just go into a little bit about what your Christian background is and how did you get involved with student ministries?
Yeah. So, in terms of my faith background, I actually didn't really go to church until I was, the first time I remember going to church, I was 9 years old. And I went to a Sunday school class on an Easter Sunday at our local Baptist church. My uncle was a really active member there and his family, and so I went to that church, and I didn't go back. It wasn't a bad experience, wasn't a good experience, but I just didn't really go back. And but there was the guy who taught that class. He got my information, my address, and he would send me a note every couple weeks just saying, hey, loved having you, would love to have you back. And he did that for almost I guess probably about a year and a half, just saying, hey, love to have you back, it was great having you. Nothing weird, nothing creepy, just this person who cared enough about a little 9-year-old guy. Well, eventually I ended up coming back when I was old enough for youth group, and grew up in that church. Theologically, I'm very, very different now than I was then. But that church gave me a community. It gave me a group of friends. It gave me a passion that was really that's still deep in my bones. If you want to kind of talk about Jeremiah, it's a passion, a fire that still burns deep in my bones. And like I said, theologically, I'm very different. But during that time, I had a really, really hard time in my family. And I won't go into all the details, but it was right around the time the internet started being in the home with the personal computer, with the PC. And my mom met a guy in a chat room. You remember the chat rooms.
Right.
She met a guy in the chat room and ended up leaving our family. It put me, and I was 15 at the time, it put me in this incredible downward spiral. Started abusing alcohol really badly, even to the point where I was suicidal. And the one constant in my life through that whole time was my youth group and my youth minister. And they were there for me and loved me and gave me opportunities. And through that experience, I came out on the other side of that experience pretty scarred, pretty beaten up, but alive. And that youth minister, I went to him one day about a year later, and I said, I think I'm ready to maybe tell my story. I was thinking maybe talk to the youth group one night and kind of tell them what all happened and, kind of how I felt God had brought me through that. And he kicks me out of his office and he says, "Hey, give me a minute. I need to make a phone call." And I thought, well, what a jerk! I just kind of bore my soul to you.
Right.
And he calls me back in, and he had 3 weeks of speaking lined up for me at 3 different churches in the community. He said, "We've all just been waiting for you to realize this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life." And I was like, wait, that's not what I said. I said I might want to tell the story to our youth group. And
that's amazing.
So a few days later, I'm speaking at a church about 30 minutes away, and truthfully, it just never stopped. It would start off with me telling the story, but then it really transformed into doing youth ministry in my local church alongside my youth minister. I was doing it as a youth minister with him when I was junior and senior in college, and I realized that if someone could be there for me in such an amazing, powerful way in such a delicate time in my life, maybe that's what God's calling me to do as well. And so that's sort of how the journey began.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about community and whatnot. I kind of actually was going to dive right into it with that whole topic of community and youth group. And my experience growing up in a kind of like a small country type church, our youth group was real small. It was like, I don't know, a half dozen of us. And it was really like, I think it was all boys, and maybe every once in a while there was a girl there. And of course that changed the whole dynamic. So we were more just like group of guys that grew up together. And I ended up moving out of that country area. And so in my 20s, I got involved in larger non-evangelical church. And I was never really involved with youth as a youth worker, but I was involved with children's ministry. My wife and I, we weren't married at the time, but we were all involved in children's ministry. It was a bunch of singles. And we used to use the youth kind of as mentors in the children's ministry, and they helped out. And then they had like the worship band, and they would do the worship for the kids. But anyway, what I saw with the youth in that church was there was a tremendous amount of action and involvement, and they were really involved in ministry, and it was very tight knit. However, I would say one of the weaknesses of that was I started to see kind of an us versus them mentality, and that youth group was kind of a place where outsiders coming into the church kind of had a hard time to fit in. And so I think that a lot of outsiders, they may have, some of them put on a good show to kind of be included in what the church kids, so-called, were doing. And I think that it might have been to their detriment. So have you seen that kind of mentality and that us versus them and inner circle type things going on? How do you deal with that?
Oh, yeah. And I think youth ministry and even the church as a whole, I think that's the constant tension that we live in. This constant tension of the beloved community versus the community that goes out. And that can be a really hard tension to maintain, although I think it's the one that we have to constantly live in and constantly be right in the middle of that tug between the beloved community and the community that goes out. You see it in the whole church, but I think the microcosm of it really is youth ministry. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. And I think both have to be equally as important. You have to have those deep, connected, beloved community relationships. You've got to have that. They have to trust each other. They have to know each other. They have to be in an intimate relationship with one another. Because if you're not, you can't be there for one another in the tragedy and in the joy. If you don't enter into that tight knit community, then kids will leave. I mean, nowadays kids will leave to go find that somewhere else.
Right.
But at the same time, what you got to do is it's what is it? What's the saying? Hold it fast, keep it loose.
Right.
You gotta have that beloved community, but at the same time, there always has to be an open spot. There always has to be an empty chair. The group can never be a closed circle. There always has to be a way in. And so, part of the way I like to think about it is the gift of community is a gift that's so precious and so good that it's our job to share it. in our youth group at the Methodist church I work at. Every Sunday night after we have a youth worship service on Sunday nights. And every Sunday night, we will get in a giant circle in the room, and we'll cross our right hand over our left hand, and we'll hold the hands of the people beside us. And I will generally tell them something like, this is your community. These are your brothers and sisters. These are the people who love you, who will be here for you. But this gift is too good for us to keep closed in. And so then we'll say the MYF benediction together, holding those hands. And then what we do is at the end of the benediction, you do a quarter spin. You're still holding hands, and what it does is you're focusing in when you're saying the benediction, and then you spin out. So it's even this symbolic gesture where we say, we are a community that is here for one another, but our job is not to focus in, it's to focus out. So we do that actually just as a physical reminder each week that we have to live in that tension.
That's a pretty cool way to end things with the ministry, and it kind of it gives like an anchor point. It kind of sticks in their head for them to be thinking about that throughout the week. And so, we talk about the inclusion with youth, and at that age, I think it's, I think, like you said, the church as a whole, as adults, I don't think we have as difficult a time of including others not like us. To some degree, yes, but and you're always going to have cliques. But I think that with that teenage and student age, do you find that to be that it's more of an issue?
Yeah, I mean, and it really depends a lot of times, how comfortable those kids are in their own skin. If a kid is comfortable in their own skin, if they feel safe, it's a lot easier for them to turn out. And to welcome people in. But if people are feeling, if a kid's feeling threatened, if they're in a hard time in their life, if they're uncertain about their role or their position in the community, it can be more rigid. And so I think
that's a lot of teenagers, don't you think? Though a lot of teenagers. Yeah, I have a 16-year-old, and it's like, every couple of days, it seems that there's like a new David. It's he's there's always this like, it's always who he is, but he's always got this new approach and this new kind of thing that he's into, and as he's kind of finding himself at that age.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And so one of the things that I experienced in youth group, and I think that we can help provide, is youth group can be a constant for kids. If they feel like when they're in that place, they're safe, they're nurtured, they're loved, they're not judged, I think it can be a place that becomes a constant for them. And when they have consistency, especially in that tumultuous, those adolescent years, which we now know last all the way up to about 25, extended adolescence. But if they can have that kind of safe community in those years, they can be much, much more receptive. As long as they have some consistency and continuity in that.
So you mentioned that age 25, and I'm not hip with this whole like the millennial generation kind of is up to about that age group. So you're saying that with a lot of youth, if they kind of stick with it until they're 25, they'll be somewhat solid or more so solid in the church. And a lot of data seems to point to millennials leaving the church in large numbers. Do you agree with that data? Do you see that as a problem or a challenge for the church?
Man, that's $1 million question. Okay, so
yeah,
it's really interesting. I think a lot of folks have said that youth ministry has been the downfall of the church. That it is one of the major causes of the millennial slide or the rise of the nuns. However you want to talk about the millennial conundrum. And in some ways, I think that's true. I think when youth group is a church in and of itself, when it's not more deeply connected to the whole church, when kids basically are relegated to the basements,
right,
and they're told to figure out their spirituality down there, as opposed to being part of the larger congregation. I think that kind of youth ministry teaches kids not to be a part of the larger congregation. You never sit beside babies and blue hairs, right?
Right.
You need that kind of full generational approach. The other side, though, is we're in a time and place where the church is going to look really different in 10 years. It's going to look really, really different in 20 years. And we're in a time of transition, and the old models, and when I say old, I don't mean the 1,500-year-old models. The 50-year-old models, the 1950s, Protestant, mainline church, and it's just not working anymore. And it's past time for us to reconsider our focus, our models, what works, what doesn't work, how are we faithful as a community. And I just think we're right in the middle of that transition, and there's no longer kind of a social impetus that keeps us inside of these broken models. I mean, up until 20 years ago, especially in the South where I am, there was very much a social construct that said, if you're going to be a part of this larger community, of this city, if you're going to be successful, if you're going to be in business or, whatever, if you're going to be connected, you're going to be a part of a local congregation. And so it's sort of a part of our social fabric. Well, that's just no longer the case anymore. And I'm glad, to be honest with you. I don't want that to be a norm that gets us ahead in life. And so since that's no longer kind of a part of the social contract, there's no reason to kind of fake it till you make it anymore. And that, coupled with this changing model, is caused a whole generation to kind of say, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'm not that interested anymore. But those same studies are also telling us that it's not that they're not interested in God. It's not that they're not interested in spirituality. They see the church and institutional religion as something wholly separated and different than God and spirituality. And they're seeking God, they're seeking community, they're seeking spirituality. They're just not finding it in the local church. And the local church has got to respond to that and quit reacting to it.
Well, that's a great point. If I just interrupt you for a second, yeah. I think what you just said, those three things that the youth of this age are looking for is they're looking for God and spirituality and a connectedness, but not finding it in the church. And, like I said, with my family, my 16-year-old, we don't attend church. We haven't for many years, and we will on occasion, but he'll kind of roll his eyes like, when I say we're going to go visit this place, and he's like, Dad, I don't want to go to church. I'm agnostic. And, but I think that deep inside he believes in God. But I think that like what he experienced as a child and us being really committed to an evangelical church, and he had a hard time with that, and he didn't find that connectedness and whatnot there. And coming through like the middle school years, he kind of was an outcast in the youth group that he was attending. And so I think he's looking for those things, but like you said, he's a perfect example of he's not finding it in most modern churches.
Yeah. And part of the problem I think too is when a kid, and I don't know your son, but when I hear a kid say they're agnostic or they're atheist, my first question to them is, what is the definition, or what is the person of God you've been given that you're rejecting? Because I guarantee you, the person of God that you've been told or that you've been given I would probably reject that idea of God as well.
Yeah.
And so that's where I try to start the conversation, because again, I think most people are kind of pushing against the church. They're pushing. And sometimes they'll say, I don't believe in God anymore, but I think they're pushing on an idea of God, a very narrow idea of God, usually an abusive idea of God that's been given to them and told that this is the only God, this is the only way to believe. And so they've been told that enough that they go, well, if that's who God is, then there's no way I can be a part of that, and so I'm rejecting God. And so I think a lot of what we have to do is help kids understand, help adults understand that the narrow image of God that you've been given might not be the God that Jesus called Father. That might not be the God that we see through the Scripture, and that might not be the God that's working even in this conversation now.
Yeah.
And so try to give them a broader definition and help them see, because that's one of my favorite things to do is to sit with a kid who's in that situation get them to tell me who they think God is. And then 9 times out of 10, I'll say, yeah, I don't worship that God either. That God's I'm not going to use an expletive right now because I don't know the code for your show, but that God's a dirty, you know what,
Yeah.
you know? And so I can sit there in solidarity with that kid and say, I'm with you. I don't believe in that God either. I'm an agnostic to that God as well.
Well, I think that's interesting because, I mean, where he's seen us as parents kind of shift our mindset throughout the years. And, you know, obviously all the conversations I have about God that I have with my wife, I don't have them with him, but he may pick up on some of that. And that's what, you know, myself as a parent, this kind of leads into my next question is, how important is it to involve parents in the conversation with their kids? Like, you know, you're doing your youth minister work, and then not all the kids that you have in your ministry are getting that same type of attention at home. So how do you involve parents, and you know, how important is it to involve the parents, and how do you accomplish that through your ministry?
Yeah, I you know, a youth ministry that is not intentionally engaging, empowering, and equipping parents is a youth ministry that will fail in the long term every single time. Now, they might succeed in the short term. They might create incredible atmospheres and do, you know, really cool trips and services, and they might have a ton of kids. But when we talk about long-term sustained faith, we know that upwards of 70% of a kid's spiritual influence comes directly from their parents. Upwards of 70%.
Wow.
So a youth ministry that does not, and that comes from a study that was done about 10 years ago called the National Study of Youth and Religion by Christian Smith. It came out of UNC Chapel Hill. Revolutionary, groundbreaking study. My first book, Hall of Faith, was written based on that study. So if we're not engaging parents, equipping them and empowering them to do ministry with their kids, then we are missing out on upwards of 70% of the spiritual influence that kid has in their life.
Wow.
Youth ministers have 10 to 12%. Friends have around 15%. So even that combined, you can call that youth group. You're talking about 27 to 30%. That's it. So it is wildly important to engage parents in youth ministry. Some ways to do that. One ratio I like to tell youth ministers when I'm consulting with them is, if you got in youth ministry just hang out with kids, you need to get out of youth ministry. You need to be about the work of knowing their parents. Their parents have to trust you, and you've got to be about partnering with those parents to do ministry. You got to equip them, empower them, enable them to do ministry. And I tell youth ministers all the time, you should be spending, if you've got 100% time, you should be spending 60 of it with parents, working with parents, enabling them and equipping them, and 40% with students. So even that, you know, you're spending more time thinking about parents than you are kids because of that 70% influence. So you got to train them. Most parents feel really uncomfortable with the Bible.
Right.
Most parents grew up in a youth group where they didn't really get it. You know, they don't feel like they have a solid grasp on the biblical text, on theology, on hard questions. You know, a lot of parents grew up in a culture where you were expected to have an answer for hard questions, and a lot of parents feel ill-equipped to do that. One of the first things I tell parents is, you know, one of the best answers to a hard question is I don't know.
Yeah.
Not only I don't know, but I'm still struggling with that myself. And then engage in a vulnerable conversation with the kid to say, yeah, I don't get evil in the world with a good God either. That's a really hard question. And entering into those conversations of vulnerability. They can smell you when you're BSing. They know. So don't, you know. So giving them permission. I think also helping them. You know, in our Methodist church, we do confirmation, and I hear from parents every year, gosh, I wish I could go through confirmation again. Gosh, I wish I knew, or I wish I could learn all the things my kid's learning. Well, so what we do is I write them a letter every week that tells them exactly what we learned, and I give them 3 or 4 questions to engage their kids with that week so that they can be in dialogue with their kids and know what they're learning at youth group or at confirmation.
What's your feedback with that, Ben?
Some parents don't engage it because that's not a priority for them. But I hear all the time from parents who say, "Hey, yeah, we talked about it this week. Here's some things that we talked about. Here's some things my kid said. I learned this from my kid. I've never thought about it that way before." And it's causing organic conversations between kids and parents about spirituality, which doesn't happen very often.
No.
Just in the regular world. So it's just giving opportunity and permission, I think.
And I think that's so key what you said too about like it's okay to say I don't know, and that's something that's been like our dinner table conversations a lot lately. Yeah. And I mean I'm a big time seeker. I've been seeking God for my whole life, and I think lately becoming more and more frustrated with that search, and it's one of the reasons why I started podcasting. I was going to write a book, and then I'm like, well, I couldn't really pin down a topic, and I said, well, if I start podcasting, I can talk about all the areas
That's right.
that I want to. But anyway, so like our dinner table conversations will be like, my wife's kind of funny, and like she wants the answers. She's old school, raised Catholic, and she's like, well, I just want to know what the truth is. I want to know this. I want to know that. And I'll be like, I don't know. I really don't know. And, and then she thinks that I'm giving my son like license to not believe. And I'm like, I just really don't know at this time. Like I'm really just researching and talking. And like you say, it's just really, really becoming more of an organic thing than a structured thing with us. And so I think it's good. Definitely parents have to engage, and I think we do. But like you said, I think it's if they don't have the answers, like it's okay to be that person.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I tell parents a lot is, because a lot of parents say the same thing. I just want to be able to give them an answer. I just want to be able to give them truth. And what I tell them too is, I do too. Everybody wants to be able to give them something solid, but everything that we believe is solid is still an opinion. It's still an idea. It's not solid. And so one of the things I tell parents a lot is, an answer that is easily given is an answer that can easily be taken away. And so it is more healthy when you think about sociology of religion. When you think about James Fowler and you go and look at Piaget and Kohlberg, the people who have to wrestle through their faith, the people who ask the hard questions and do not get the easy answers and rarely come to resolution, are the ones who grow the most in their faith. In James Fowler's Stages of Faith, the way you move between stages of faith is through crisis points. So the way you grow is through crisis, not through certainty. And so what you have is we have a whole generation of adults who have been taught that certainty equals a strong faith, and there is nothing farther from the truth. Crisis, doubt, anxiety, wrestling, that is what we know creates strong faith, not certainty. Certainty creates this hollow shell that becomes very rigid and easily broken. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see so many disillusioned evangelicals. Because they've been told for so long that certainty equals strong faith, and we just know that it doesn't. I love leaning on the story of Jacob. Jacob's going to meet his brother. He's prepared for a battle. It's going to get nasty, and it says he lays his head down on a rock. He goes to sleep, and he ends up wrestling with this angel all night, and he wrestles with him the entire night. And the sun is about to rise. The angel is trying to get away. The messenger is trying to get away. And Jacob basically says, look, I'm not going to let go of you unless you give me a blessing. And the angel touches his hip, and it says, and Jacob never walked the same again. Right. I love that metaphor for how we go about learning, how we go about faith. Let's wrestle, and refuse to give up on that question until something about us is dramatically different.
Until God makes you limp.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And we never walk the same again.
Well, it's like it's
youth ministry.
Yeah, it's not the American mindset. That's I think the problem. It's this whole like American Christianity that I've been working to deconstruct for the last few years.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't have the answers, if we're not the You know, I just remember growing up hearing things like, "You're the head and not the tail," and we're city on a hill, and it's that like powerful Christianity that you just weren't even supposed to question anything.
Well, and so much of it comes from, our core is founded in these Puritan principles. So much of our country is founded in these Puritan principles, where authority, hierarchy, certainty, we're at the top of the food chain, and even more so. I mean, we've gotten to a place just in the past 50, I would say 50 plus years, where the religious establishment, instead of changing with the times, instead of letting culture ask good questions of faith, the religious establishments doubled down and said, "Nope, we're gonna exclude all questions. We're gonna erase all doubt and uncertainty, and we're just gonna double down on this very Western 21st century understanding, contextualized understanding of who God is and what God's doing." And that's terrible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do see it shifting, and like, even a couple of years ago on Facebook, I'm always arguing with people about theology and this and that, and I never really found these types of groups of questioning people, and now I'm so much more involved with groups like that. It's very liberating. It's very freeing. So for many ways, like, I thank social media for being around to even kind of to help validate my existence and my journey. But do you find social media, for all of its good points, is this something that is damaging for youth nowadays, or is it something that can unite them, bring them together, or perhaps even a little of both?
Oh, I think it's definitely both. I think any major advance in technology has unintended consequences that are both beautiful and horrifying. I mean, just think about social media. I mean, I think history will look back at social media exactly the way, in the internet, exactly the way history looks back at the printing press.
Yeah.
It was a way for people to distribute ideas, a way for people, like you just said, to know that they're not alone. Sometimes it's easy to think, gosh, am I really that crazy? And then all of a sudden you find a chat thread, or you find a website that's saying the same thing you've been saying for the past 10 years, or at least been feeling for the past 10 years. And all of a sudden you're validated, and you go, gosh, maybe God's working in different ways right now.
Yeah.
As far as kids, a buddy of mine, a guy named Andrew Zursky, just put out a book recently, just in the past, I guess a couple of months. And it's about teens and social media. And he contends that social media is, obviously it's both. It's both a good and a negative thing. The book, by the way, is called Beyond the Screen, Youth Ministry for the Connected But Alone Generation. And he talks about social media and devices especially as a way of connecting, for kids to connect when they feel completely alone in the world.
Right.
And he gives this example of, a kid can be standing in a room of 100 of their peers and feel completely alone. Yet because of the tether of the device, they can connect with that small group of people who they do trust, who they do love, who they know loves them, and can give them feedback and comfort. And it's a brilliant book, incredible research done. He's a PhD from Princeton Theological, and just a really good guy. I really encourage if folks have teenagers especially, and you're wondering how is social media, how is the internet, how are these devices affecting, comforting, consoling our kids, check out the book. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think not just our kids too. I mean, it's kind of for adults as well. I mean,
right.
To be totally candid, it's like I'm 43 years old and sometimes feel more alone than I ever have in my life. And but with the social media now, it's like connect with people all over the world, and it kind of does work to bring people together. So despite the challenges that it may that social media may present to the kids, last thing I kind of finish up with this is what are like the main challenges that you're finding right now, the main problems that you find facing youth today in you ministering to them? What are your main concerns right now?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is we are in an overbooked, overcommitted, overmedicated culture for our kids right now. Every parent, and it feels like every school system, is pushing their kids as though they're going to get into Harvard.
Right.
Harvard only has a certain number of spots in its incoming class each year, and your kid's probably not going to be one of them.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Right.
But our school systems and our parents have been sort of brainwashed to believe that we have to push our kids like every single one of them is going to be a Rhodes Scholar. They've got to be involved in, 5 extracurriculars. They've got to get all A's. They've got to make a 30 on their ACT. And the truth of the matter is we're running our kids into the ground. We're literally killing our kids. The rates of depression, of anxiety, of suicide, all those things are higher in kids than they have ever been in the history of our country. It is through the roof, the amount of anxiety, especially anxiety-related illnesses and depression. And it's traced back to the fact that I read a study there that I cannot tell you where it is, but the study said the average 12-year-old has more stress and more commitment on their shoulders than the average 40-year-old man did 50 years ago.
Wow.
That's a sickness.
Yeah.
I mean, we're dealing with a sickness. And so I'm seeing these kids who are overcommitted, who are pushed. And the inverse of that, they're being told they're not good enough. When someone constantly tells you you've got to do more, you've got to be more, you've got to make more, then what they're inadvertently telling you is what you are is not good enough. And so you've got to be more. And so what's happening is there's kind of two things. You have kids who are on ADHD medicine, they're on antidepressants, they're on medicines that help focus, and they're just over-medicating in order to try to achieve these goals. The other thing that happens is they self-medicate. Kids, you've got to have a pressure valve somewhere. And when you have all that stress, all that anxiety, all that pressure on you, you've got to have a pressure valve somewhere. And so kids turn to drugs and alcohol, dangerous behavior. I mean, there's a million different things that they turn to. But more so than that, I'm seeing kids with anxiety, depression. It's tough. It's really tough. And we've just got to pump the brakes as a culture. And re-engage kids. Understand that there are a lot of kids that a C+ is going to be great, and they're going to be just fine. Understand that not every kid's going to go to a 4-year university and go to a graduate program afterwards. Understand that it's okay to just be an art club and not play a sport, not run track, not do whatever.
Yeah.
And it's good. And that not all of us are going to be Harvard graduates, and the fact of the matter is most of us aren't, and that's good.
Yeah, it doesn't reflect the reality of the world. It really doesn't. I mean, I work in a factory where the kids are in their early 20s, and they're making more money with no college education, and no debt than a lot of their counterparts. That were, and I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I think definitely to have that pressure removed. That's something I've tried to really do with my son as well. Is just he was in the marching band. He's a drummer, and they practice 12 hours a day in the summer. It's crazy, and I'm like, hey, do it because you love it, and that's the bottom line. If you love doing it, do it. Once the minute that it feels like it's too much pressure, then don't do it. I'm not going to force them to.
Yeah, and I think one of the byproducts too, if our kids are booked solid from 6 a.m. till, with their homework and stuff till 11 at night, they have no time or room or brain power or energy to actually think, to think about things, to have original thoughts and ideas. They have no time to create. They have no time to reflect. They have no time to develop as a person, because they're always so busy going. And we know that the busyness isn't really what develops you. It's those times in between where you think, where you reflect, where you become something more than you are at the moment. And our kids are just so packed out. They're not I'm a firm believer they're not developing in the ways they should be because they don't have the margin. We've got to create margin in our kids' lives, and we've got to model that too as adults. You know, today I'm in back-to-back meetings. You know, through most of the day. I've got to model something better than that for my kids.
Right.
And we wear our busyness on our sleeves as a badge of honor. And we've worn it as a badge of honor, and we've worn it as an excuse. And we've got to change that as parents. It's not something to brag about that you know you've been in meetings for 14 hours in a day. That should be a sign of a sickness. I should be a dot on an MRI or on a CAT scan that you should look at and say, okay, is this something I'm should be scared about?
I agree, man. We definitely got to slow down, I think, as a society. And I don't know what it will take for us to get to that point, because I think that all the busyness with society and it's modeling our our spirituality and our faith kind of models that. And you don't want to have a spirituality and a faith that's full of busyness as well.
That's right.
I think we definitely need to slow down a little bit. You sound like you got your work cut out for you.
It's a good and it's a fun work. It really is. I enjoy it.
That's great. And all right, so just last thing, how can my listeners follow you and get involved in what you're doing and get a hold of your books and whatnot?
Yeah. So I blog regularly at organicstudentministry.com. That's my website. That's where you can read my blog. You can find out how to contact me. I speak and do consulting all over the country, and so you can find out all that information on organicstudentministry.com. You can like my author page on Facebook. It's just type in Stephen Ingram author. And I'll post on there, and then you can follow me on Twitter at Stephen L. Ingram, all one word at Twitter.
All right, Stephen, I'll be sure to get those links up when the interview posts, and make sure I pass that information along to the listeners. I thank you so much for taking your time to come on the show and sharing about this very important topic.
John, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate all the work you're doing and thoughtful engagement that you're providing for communities of faith and for people who are, like you said, who are seekers. I'm one of them too. So I appreciate the work you do.
We're in good company.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.
Take care.